Hi everyone, welcome back. In this video, we are going to talk about VSEPR theory, which stands for valence shell electron pair repulsion theory. And this theory can effectively help us to predict the three-dimensional shape of a molecule. And for VSEPR theory, we have 5 basic shapes, and we are going to look at each of them respectively. The first one is linear shape, and we can use the molecule carbon dioxide as an example. So if we use Lewis structure diagram, we will know that the carbon will serve as the central atom, and it will form 2 double bonds with the 2 oxygen atoms on both sides. And this VSEPR theory tells us that for lone pairs and bonding electrons, they will arrange in a way that minimizes repulsion from one another. So the electron pairs take up positions as far from one another as possible. So we can see that in this case, we have 2 double bonds, and we actually have a few lone pairs on both sides. So they want to position themselves as far from each other as possible. So the way that they can do so is to form an angle of 180 degrees. And we can visualize this in this simulation, just like this. So this is a 3-dimensional model for carbon dioxide. And we can see that it's a straight line. And the second basic shape is called trigonoplanar. And we can use a molecule such as BH3, boron trihydride. And if we draw the Lewis structural diagram for this molecule, we will see that boron has, since boron is in group 13, so it will have 3 valence electrons. And for each hydrogen, they only have 1 valence electron. So the boron will place in the middle as the central atom, and the 3 hydrogen atom will place around the boron atom, form a triangular shape like this. And all these 3 hydrogen atoms are actually on the same plane as the central boron atom. That's why it's called trigonoplanar. And the reason why the 3 hydrogen atoms locate like this is because they want to position as far away from each other as possible in this case. And we can still visualize it using this model. So we can see that this would be the 3D visualization of a trigonoplanar molecule. So we can see that these 3 atoms actually place on the same plane, and they form a triangular shape. The next shape is called angular, and sometimes it's also called band, and sometimes it's called V-shaped. And a very common and a typical molecule for this shape would be water, H2O. And we still use the Lewis structural diagram. So hydrogen only has 1 valence electron, and oxygen has 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the oxygen will position in the middle, and the 2 hydrogen will form single bonds with the central oxygen atom respectively. However, we will encounter a question. So in this case, which structure is correct? This one or this one? And if we think about it, the two bonding electrons of the oxygen atom will pair up with the one valence electron of the hydrogen to form one covalent bond each. But the oxygen still has two lone pairs on one side. Therefore, we must take them into account. So the two valence electrons will place on the same side. So we can see that this structure would be more reasonable because the bonding electrons, the lone pairs, they all position around the central oxygen atom evenly to minimize the repulsion between one another. And we can see that in this case, the electrons are too squeezed on the top side and fairly empty on the bottom, which is not reasonable. And we can see that in this structure, the two covalent bonds actually form an angle of approximately 109 degrees. And this is called bend. And we can also visualize this in this model by placing two. So it's just like this. So the central oxygen atom will have two lone pairs on the top, and the two hydrogen atoms will form an angle right here. The next shape is called trigonal pyramidal. And we will use the molecule nitrogen trihydride, or more commonly known as ammonia. And for hydrogen, it still has one valence electron. And for nitrogen, it will have 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Therefore, nitrogen atom has a higher bonding capacity, which again means that this atom has more available bonding electrons, and it will be placed in the middle as the central atom. And the three hydrogen atoms will place around the nitrogen atoms. So this intuitively would be the Lewis structure. Now we want to think about the shape. So in fact, this lone pair electron of the nitrogen will place on the top, and then the three hydrogen atoms will form a shape like a triangular pyramid. So this would be the nitrogen, and these three would be the hydrogen. And to effectively illustrate this, we would use dash to represent the bond that is in the same plane as the paper, a dotted line to represent a covalent bond that is into the paper, and a triangle shape to represent the bond that is out of the paper, pointing out of the paper. Therefore, we would draw something like this: nitrogen, a lone pair, one hydrogen that is on the same plane as the paper, one hydrogen that is out of the paper, and one hydrogen that is into the paper. And we can also visualize this in the simulation. So the central nitrogen atom will have 3 single bonds with the 3 hydrogen atoms. And this is a trigonal planar model, as we discussed before. However, in this case, the nitrogen atom will have one more lone pair, which will sort of push the 3 covalent bonds down to form a trigonal pyramidal shape, just like this. And the next shape which would be the final shape in the 5 basic shapes, which is called tetrahedral shape. And for this case, we will be using the molecule carbon tetrahydride. So for this molecule, the carbon has 4 valence electrons and the hydrogen has 1. Therefore, the carbon will place in the middle as the central atom, and the 4 hydrogen will each form a single bond with the carbon. So this would be the Lewis structural diagram. Now we want to think about the shape of this. So to understand this effectively, we can think about this atom right here, logically equivalent to the lone pair of this nitrogen atom in the middle. So they serve the same purpose, to push the other 3 covalent bonds down. Therefore, we can draw like this. The carbon atom in the middle, 1 hydrogen atom pointing right up, the other 3 hydrogen atoms are pointing down. However, one of the 3 hydrogen atoms is still on the same plane as the paper, and the other 2, one is pointing out of the paper, and one is pointing into the paper. And it will form a shape just like this. And we can visualize that in the simulation as well. So we will have four single bonds. And this single bond on the top serves the same purpose as 1 lone pair. So if we delete this top one, add a lone pair, they structurally, if we include the electron, if we include the lone pair, they're all tetrahedral, just like this. And one characteristic of a tetrahedral shape is that no matter how we rotate this model, it will always look exactly the same. There are also other more advanced or more complex shapes using VSEPR theory as well. And the 5 shapes we have just mentioned above are the 5 basic shapes, and I will mention a few other advanced or more complex shapes. So the first one is called trigonal bipyramidal. And we will use phosphorus pentachloride. And this shape would look like this. So the phosphorus will place in the middle, one chloride pointing up, one chloride pointing down, and one chloride and the other three chloride actually form a trigonal planar in the middle. So it is actually something like this. So the middle part is the phosphorus and 5 fluorides. And we can visualize this using the simulation as well. Just like this. So we have the phosphorus in the middle, 2 chlorides on the top and bottom, and the 3 chlorides forming a trigonal planar around the central phosphorus atom. And the next shape is called the octahedral shape. And the octahedral, we will use sulfur octafluoride. We will use the molecule, this one. And the sulfur will place in the middle, and then one fluorine atom will pointing up, one fluorine will pointing down, and the other 4 fluorine will form a square shape around the central sulfur atom. So it would form a 3D shape like this. Just like this. And this central point will be the phosphorus, sulfur, and fluorine, fluorine. Just like this. Single bond, single bond, single bond, single bond. Everything's single bonds. And we can also visualize that using our simulation. So we can see that this is the central sulfur atom, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fluorine atoms to form a octahedral shape. And the next shape is called square pyramidal. And for square pyramidal, I will just illustrate it using circles to represent atoms. And it would look something like this. So it's very similar to octahedral shape. However, the bottom atom right here will be replaced by a lone pair right here. And we can illustrate that here. So it's very similar to the octahedral, but the bottom atom, the bottom covalent bond, is replaced by a lone pair electron. And the final shape we will be talking about today is called square planar. And the square planar is when we replace the top covalent bond and the atom by a lone pair as well. So we only have the central square part now. So we can replace one more covalent bond by a lone pair. So we will have two lone pairs on the top and bottom of the central atom, and then 4 single bonds, or not necessarily single bonds, and 4 atoms surrounding around the central atom evenly, like a square shape. And that's all the shapes that will be covered in this video using VSEPR theory. Thank you for watching.